Let's have a look at these booklets then. If I can get you to take a look first of all at the front page, underneath section A, it's telling you about the alcohol licensing law in Scotland. In the top right hand corner of the booklet, the words licensing brackets Scotland Act of 2005 is written, and that's the name of the legislation. So if you ever need to look it up, then that's what you're looking for. If you're Googling it, then that's what you're looking for. It's the Scottish law. It doesn't apply anywhere else in the world. It's similar to other types of licensing training, for example, the responsible service of alcohol in Australia. There are various different varieties of a similar idea in all sorts of parts of Europe now. So you will have come across similar things, but there are differences, obviously. So tonight is the only one that's applicable here in Scotland. On the booklet, we start by introducing this to you. The fact is that 11 years ago now, this legislation was new. So it was a completely new idea. Well, not a completely new idea. It was a revamp. It was a change to the legislation. What we had in place before that was legislation that was passed in 1976. So very old-fashioned type of legislation, a very old way of doing things, and actually it became not appropriate. It wasn't possible to work under those same conditions back from 1976. So the 2005 legislation has changed an awful lot. There's a few updates to it as well. It's been updated several times since it was brought in 2005, and not the least of that is the fact that we started training everybody. Since 2007 we had to start training everybody, and that was brought in 2009. So there are, as you'll see, there's a few updates that have come into place. When the Scottish Government was deciding what they needed to do, one of the things they were looking at was actually the statistics that they were finding for accidents. Accidents caused by drunk pedestrians were really quite a problem. Health issues, the fact that more and more people were having health issues associated with alcohol abuse. The fact that there was a crime problem associated with alcohol abuse and so on. So this was the reason why they decided they needed to change it. So when they sat down and they decided what are we going to talk about in terms of our licensing, the 5 licensing objectives were the core values for the new legislation. So what I would like you to do is to read them through, become familiar with them and memorise them. There are 5 of them. They're about preventing, protecting and securing things. So we're preventing crime and disorder at number 1. We're securing public safety at number 2. We're preventing public nuisance, by which we mean noise and mess and things like that, number 3. Number 4, protecting and improving public health. And then number 5, protecting children from harm. So these are things which shape the rest of the legislation. They become, absolutely imperative for remembering everything else. When you're thinking about the rest of the structure of the law, these are very, very important. Okay, so those are the licensing objectives. You will come across measures that have been put in place in pubs, in nightclubs and hotels and restaurants that help us with those 5 licensing objectives. And one of those is CCTV. Another one is actually the security person who's standing at the door telling people they can't come in. So these are the types of things that have been brought in since 2005. And clear and obvious signage, so posters on the walls that tell us where we stand in terms of being a customer and whether or not we're able to access alcohol. These have all been put in place because of those licensing objectives. Now, the training situation is basically that everybody receives this training or something very similar to it. Most companies will use a booklet from the BIIAB or from the SVQ. This is actually adapted from a BIIAB booklet, so it is the syllabus. It's the syllabus that you would learn everywhere that you work. So it does state, and the legislation states, that all staff that are involved in the sale or service of alcohol receive 2 hours of training. So they must be trained, and a record of the training must be kept on the licensed premises. And it does include everybody, it absolutely does. It includes everybody that's paid for the job that they do, full-time or part-time. If they're not paid for the job as well, so we have volunteers sometimes working in places like voluntary clubs. If you are a bar person, obviously you need to have the training. If you're a waiter, yes, you need the training too, because you'll be pouring glasses of wine, you'll be serving drinks at table. If you're working behind a counter where there's a bottle of beer that you can serve, you're selling alcohol. So it might not be a bar, but it's a similar sort of setting. So it does include absolutely everybody if sale and service of alcohol is included. The Act actually specifies that a minimum of 2 hours is taken to complete this training, and this is not a personal licence. This is the staff training, so everybody receives this, whereas a personal licence holder, somebody like a manager or supervisor, will have even more training, so they'll go through a bigger deal. A personal licence is actually something you need to apply for from the council. The council will grant you your personal licence as long as you've completed personal licence training. So it's a slightly different thing that we're doing tonight. Now, the trainer is actually possible for it to be anybody. Okay, it does not have to be a manager and it does not have to be a supervisor. It can be anybody who holds a personal licence, or it can be any trainer, if it's a qualified trainer, that holds the relevant qualification to provide the training. So yeah, it can be theoretically anybody that trains you. Now, my name is Christine Williamson. I work for Quality Link Recruitment and I'm a personal licence holder on the basis that I provide training. I'm not a manager, I'm not a supervisor, so try not to make that mistake. But yes, if somebody asks you that question, then that's who's supplying the training for you today. Now, today we're going to cover 16 specified training matters which are listed on the front of your booklet, and would you believe we have just covered the first 2. So we've talked about the licensing objectives and the legal basis of the requirement for training for staff. The definition of alcohol at number 3 will be on the next page. What constitutes an unlicensed sale at number 4, the same. The functions of licensing standards officers was actually going to be in the next section, so that will be on a different page again. So will number 6, the nature of an operating plan, as well as number 7, the different types of premises license conditions. Number 8, special provision for clubs, that's going to be on the next page. It just makes a little bit more sense to flow, and you'll see it's printed out there. Number 9, the licensed hours. Number 10, offences under the Act. Number 11, proof of age. And number 12, test purchasing. That's all covered in Section B as well. Section C will cover best practice as regards standards of service and refusing service. Number 14, units of alcohol and the relationship between units and the strength of different alcoholic drinks. Number 15, sensible drinking limits. And number 16, good practice managing conflict. Usually people are very happy when I say this is matter number 16 because it means that we've reached very close to the end of the training. Okay. Now, there aren't any numbers beside these items when we're going through the booklet, so trust me, they are all included. If I can now get you to turn to page 2, we start by giving you the definition of what is alcohol. This is licensing concerning the sale and service of alcohol. So I'd actually like a couple of suggestions for what you think alcohol is. Are there any words that sort of pop into your mind to describe alcohol? No idea. Nobody has an idea.
Drug?
A drug. Okay. Yes. In theory, yes. It's legal though.
Yeah.
Any other?
It's a depressant.
A depressant. Okay. Very good. Any other?
Ethanol.
Ethanol. Ooh. Okay. Very technical. Yes. Okay. So people quite often call out things like vodka, whiskey, rum, these kinds of things. Ethanol is a science definition, which is true, okay? And yes, it's a drug, but it's legal. And yes, it's a depressant kind of drug. It depresses the nervous system, but we'll talk more about drugs later on. But alcohol has a specific definition in Scotland because we see it differently in different parts of the world. So in Scotland, in the Scottish legislation, it's defined as spirits, wine, beer, cider or any other fermented, distilled or spirituous liquor with a strength of more than 0.5% at the time of sale. And the percentage relates to the alcohol by volume content. So that definition deliberately does not include perfume. If you've ever been to Spain, then I believe that perfume is included in the definition, but not here in Scotland, okay? You can, or theoretically you can drink perfume to get drunk, but it's not called alcohol here in Scotland. Flavouring essence is excluded. Angostura bitters is excluded from this definition. Alcohol which is or is included in a medicinal product is also excluded from this definition, even though there are some cough mixtures, cough medicines, that you can drink to get drunk in theory, but they're not classed as alcohol for legal purposes. Denatured alcohol, methyl alcohol, naphtha and the alcohol in liqueur chocolates are also excluded from this definition. The liqueur chocolates do contain enough alcohol that theoretically they're dangerous for children, so there's an age limit of 16 attached to alcoholic chocolates. For all other alcoholic products, the age limit is 18. So that's how we define alcohol, and of course you need a license to sell alcohol. In a similar kind of idea to having a license to driving a car, you need a license to sell and serve alcohol. In the old system, we had to apply for a restaurant license or a bar license or a hotel license and then kind of force our business to be one of those things. Now, you can own a premises, you can run a premises, and the license fits your business. So we have a premises license to enable that to happen. And a premises license for a place like Murrayfield will cover absolutely everything that happens here. It covers the entire building and all the outlying grounds that surround it. To have a valid premises license, you must include the name of the premises manager. And that's actually something called a named premises manager. Without that, the premises license is not valid. The named premises manager must have a personal license in order to be the premises manager, in order to make the premises license valid. So actually you have to have 3 things to fit together a bit like a jigsaw puzzle to make us legally allowed to sell and serve alcohol. If you read the licenses section, you will notice something called an occasional license, which is actually very similar to a premises license. It just restricts the amount of time that alcohol is sold in that venue over the course of a 1-year period. So actually, Tea in the Park is an excellent example of going under an occasional license, because it's such a short period of time and it's only for once a year. Okay, so occasional licenses you'll come across from time to time. So you need those 3 things. If you do not have one of the 3 things that I've just mentioned, you should not be selling and serving alcohol. If you do sell and serve alcohol, then we use the word unlicensed to describe the sales of alcohol that you've just made. And unlicensed is just another word for not legal or illegal. Okay, so that's actually one of our 16 matters at number 4, the unlicensed sale. Remember to have all 3 items, and if one is missing, let's say for example it's been suspended or revoked like a personal license, then we're not legally entitled to sell alcohol. Members clubs are slightly different. Members clubs, like for example students' unions, rugby clubs, tennis clubs, golf clubs and so on, allow only the members to come in and out and use the facilities. So that's why students' unions are such a good example of a members club. Members clubs that sell alcohol regularly still have to have a premises license. They've got alcohol on sale all the time, so they have a license which covers that building. The requirement, however, for members clubs is that they don't require a named manager, and they don't actually require to have a personal license holder, although it's very common now for most members clubs to have both of those things. Members clubs, like big places like students' unions, will quite often have a named manager with a personal license because they do training, or they see fit, they think it's a good idea to do that and to have it in place. The requirement is still not quite there yet for members clubs to follow the rest of licensed premises. So for a members club, all that you need to remember is that they must have a premises license, they do not require the named manager, and they don't require to have the personal license. Okay, so those are the 3 things. It's the 2 differences to try and bear in mind. Okay, now guys, actually that's the end of section A. What you'll find inside your booklets is a questionnaire, and the questionnaire says licensing legislation knowledge test, what I'd like you to do is go to section A, start answering the questions as you can see them, and it does say with question 1, circle 5 answers. So if I can ask you please to circle A, B, C, D or whatever you think is the correct answer. And then for question 2, I'd like you to put a circle around true or false, the T or the F for true or false for each of the statements. Question 3 is true or false. Question 4 is asking for 3 circles, so is question 5, and then question 6 is true or false as well. So back to the booklets then, folks, if you could please pop the tests down. Remember with your tests you do need to put your name at the top. If you haven't done that yet, do that before you put it down, okay? But come back to the booklet for me just now. If I can get you to go to page 3, page 3 starts section B, and section B, the whole section is about compliance. The word compliance is about complying with the law, okay? So we are following the law, we're observing all of the details in the law, we're trying not to break it basically, okay? So there's a couple of details that you need to know to sort of start off with. The first one is actually the operating plan. If you know what an operating plan is and what it's all about, then you'll actually have a better idea of how the paperwork works. So an operating plan was new. It's one of the reasons that we discuss it in a bit of detail. It was newly set up in 2005's legislation, and it's something which most business owners will have written almost unconsciously in lots of ways. If you're starting a business, you're inclined to write what we call a business plan. You take your business plan to the bank manager gives you your money to start your business, and off you go. You've written a very similar document, therefore, to the operating plan because you've written down when you plan to open, what type of business it's going to be, are you serving what type of food, what type of alcohol you might be serving, and what times of day and all these sorts of things. So there's specific types of information to include in this type of document for the operating plan. So first of all, you must include what we call a description of the activities which will be carried out on the premises. For a place like Murrayfield, that includes everything. So bar service, food service, music being played, rugby being played, abseiling outside the front of the building, practice on the pitches outside, marquees being erected, all sorts of different things. It's an incredibly versatile venue at Murrayfield. So there's lots of activities here. The licensing hours or the licensed hours and the opening hours for the business have to be also included in the operating plan. Now we actually now include both types. Your licensed hours are quite often nowadays different from your opening hours. Hotels will open 24 hours a day but will only be licensed during certain parts of that 24-hour period. Restaurants might be open at breakfast time, but of course they might not serve alcohol until lunchtime. So that's why you have the separation and you include both in the operating plan. If it's the sort of business where extensions to the opening hours is relevant, something like a nightclub for example, then extended opening hours will be included in your operating plan, and then later on when it comes the time that you want to extend your opening hours, you write to the council and they allow that to happen. So all sorts of things, all sorts of information about hours. At number 3 we include a statement as to whether the alcohol is sold for on or off sale. Now the words on and off sale come from where people are drinking the alcohol. So if they're drinking the alcohol on the premises, it's an on sale business, it's an on sale premises. Something like a restaurant, a nightclub or a hotel is on sale. Somewhere where you're buying alcohol to take away with you, like a supermarket or an off licence, is called an off sale premises. And there are places that do a little bit of both. In rural parts of Scotland you'll have the pub which allows you to come in and eat a meal or drink at the bar, and you can take bottles away with you because it's the only business in the village. It's not uncommon, and it's very common in other parts of the world as well, on and off sale. Information about the premises manager is in the operating plan. And it's prescribed information, and what we mean by that is that there's specific types of information about the manager that have to be there. his or her name, obviously, contact details, address details, any criminal convictions that they hold, what licensing certificates they have, and where their own personal license was granted to them. Usually where they're from rather than where they work. So those are the 4 most important pieces of information that are included in operating plans. And an operating plan is submitted with an application for a premises license. So actually, when you apply for a premises license, you write this plan, you get an architect to draw a layout plan for you, which will show you where the emergency exits are and so on, and you fill in the application form. So it's quite a lengthy process going through a premises license application. But that's what the operating plan does, and that's what it's for, and the information that's included on that operating plan becomes part of the license itself. So when the document is produced, then the operating plan's information is on it. Now we must include some conditions in our operating plan. They're called national mandatory conditions. The word national means Scotland. The word mandatory means they must be there. And then conditions, well, we have conditional things all over the place. So these ones must be included in all operating plans. The first 8 are as follows. Alcohol cannot be sold on the premises without a valid premises or occasional licence, or named premises manager, or if this person does not hold a valid personal licence. That's actually what we talked about in how the licences fit together on page 2. Number 2, alcohol must be sold in compliance with the operating plan. So we follow our own plan. We do what it says in the book. Number 3, all staff that sell and serve alcohol must be trained, and a record of their training must be kept on the premises. This is more difficult when you work for an agency. However, if you work for a restaurant or a hotel, then your training records will be kept in the office. When you work for us, we keep the training records. If an inspector does need to look at them, then we make copies available when it's required. We don't automatically give you copies of these training records at the beginning, but what we can do later on is you can apply for it later. Number 4, all premises must have a duty to display notice. This is the sign which you'll become familiar with if it's behind the bar, if it's at the cash desk at the supermarket and so on, and I'll show you the wording of it in a little while. Number 5, the price of alcohol can only be changed at the start of the licensed period and must remain the same for a period of 72 hours. That means that we cannot change the price of a particular product whilst we have customers in the building. And we can't change it up the way or down the way until 72 hours have passed. So that's 3 days. And what this does is it makes an impact on something called happy hour. Has anyone ever been to happy hour? Yeah. Okay. The old-fashioned happy hour was the situation where you felt like you really had to buy lots and lots of drinks because they were so cheap. So you would buy lots and lots. You would think, crumbs, I've got 4 hours to drink them. You would drink them as fast as you could. And what's the result? You get drunk. So this has changed happy hour a bit. Happy hour still exists, but it's done in a different way, and the atmosphere is quite different because of this condition, this 72-hour condition. Number 6, irresponsible drinks promotions are not allowed. And actually what we mean by this is that we are not advertising our business in an irresponsible way. It is irresponsible to advertise a business in such a way that young people under the age of 18 attempt to come in and buy alcohol from us, because it encourages them to do something which is not yet legal for them. It's actually irresponsible to encourage people to get drunk, to encourage people to get drunk quickly. These kinds of things, this is really what we mean by irresponsible promotion. So it's an advertising campaign which says, come here, get as smashed as you possibly can, or get smashed when you're too young for it. These are the sorts of things that we mean by an irresponsible promotion. At the bottom of page 3, there are a few examples or a few kind of generalisations to give you an idea of what are deemed to be irresponsible advertising promotions. Number 6, alcohol in off-sale premises can only be displayed in 2 areas. If you pay attention when you go to the supermarket, you'll notice that there are a few bottles which you can't touch because they're too high up, or they're locked behind a glass cabinet or something like that, and that makes one of the 2 areas inaccessible to us. Number 8, premises licence fees are paid every year to the council. Now, for on-licences, there are 4 additional national mandatory conditions. So on-licences, the pubs, the nightclubs and the restaurants and so on. Tap water, which is free of charge and fit for drinking, must be available if somebody wants to drink a glass of water. Soft drinks must be sold at what we call reasonable prices. Now, if I was to sell you an orange juice that size for £5.50, and then charge you £4.50 for a pint of lager, you're much more likely to buy lager than you are to buy a soft drink. So it's not reasonable to overcharge for soft drinks. And that's the idea there, is to try and encourage people to drink less alcohol. There has to be a notice at number 3 at the entrance to the premises, which tells us if under 18s are allowed into the premises, and if so, where they can go. There are pubs that allow children, for example, into the garden. There are pubs where under 16s can eat up until 8 p.m. So there's a sign at the door which tells you very, very clearly where and if so and what's possible. If children under the age of 5 are permitted entry to the premises, they must provide baby changing facilities. And what we mean by this is not that we're changing the baby, but we're changing its nappy. And we provide a place for that to happen safely and cleanly, usually the disabled toilet where there's the drop-down table and there's a bin underneath for the nappies to go. So that's what we mean by baby changing facilities. So all of this page is about the operating plan. First of all, the most important information, and then the national mandatory conditions that are included. Turn to page 4, please. I'll now introduce somebody called the Licensing Standards Officer to you. As a temp agency, we encounter LSOs quite a lot. We are present at large events like the rugby matches, like the horse racing, and so on. So you guys will be along with us, and the LSOs come along and they check all sorts of details. So LSOs are employed by the local council. They report to the council's licensing board, and they join a special group called the Licensing Forum, which concerns itself with licensing matters, is it sensible, and so on and so forth. They have 3 main responsibilities as part of their job role. The first responsibility is called compliance, and that's the most important one. They're checking the paperwork. Is that premises licence valid? Does the named manager have a personal licence that has not been suspended? Has everybody been trained that's working behind the bar? Have we all got licensing training records and so on? So compliance is very much part of what they do. And part of that is actually observing working practices. They'll watch us serving customers, they'll watch us asking questions and taking money and so on, and they'll be thinking, is this group of staff thinking about those 5 licensing objectives? And it's one of the reasons that we say to you, do memorise them. It will help you to kind of shape your working practices. Guidance is part of an LSO's job role. They give guidance if you are applying for a premises licence or a personal licence if you need it. How do I fill out the form, for example? How much will it cost me? Who do I submit it to? And so on. That's the type of guidance they can give. Now, this is not legal advice. It's a type of guidance about a law, but because they're not lawyers, it's a different type of thing altogether. And I think we have some law students with us tonight that might agree. So legal advice is very much a different thing from this guidance. Mediation is about solving disputes. It's about solving problems. It's actually a little bit similar to marriage guidance in a way. So mediation is where I think that the pub landlord next door is breaking some of the licensing rules, but he's not talking to me, he's not listening to me. We'll call the LSO. Let's sit down and have a conversation about it. That's what we mean by mediation. Now, to carry out their job, LSOs must have access to licensed premises at any time that they actually think is reasonable. Unfortunately, that can mean 4 o'clock in the morning, okay? It can mean right in the middle of a busy service period and so on, but they have the power to enter licensed premises at that time. You should enable them to have access. You should open the door for them, politely ask them if they don't mind waiting whilst you're serving your customer, politely ask them if they want to speak to the manager, and then go and get the manager for them. So do invite LSOs into the premises if you're opening the door at 4 in the morning or whatever time it could be, and then find the manager if you can. If the manager's not available, they might ask you questions yourself. And actually, sometimes what happens at these big events is that they will come up to a member of staff and say, "Hi there, I'm the LSO, have you had your licensing training?" What would your answer be?
Yes.
Yes. Good. I'm hoping that would be the case. The next question often tends to be, "Did you understand your licensing training?" To which you would say,
Yes.
"Yes." Okay. Now that's something I'm obviously going to check when I check your questionnaires and make sure that everything's been okay. But they probably will ask you another couple of questions just to make sure that they're comfortable that you know what you're saying. So one of those questions is really commonly, "Can you tell me one of the licensing objectives?" So can anybody now shout out one licensing objective?
Preventing nuisance. Preventing nuisance.
Preventing nuisance, okay.
Preventing harm to children.
Preventing harm to children, or protecting children from harm, yeah, very good. So spit out a licensing objective, and then they might ask you another question depending on how they feel. So they might ask you something, for example, about the operating plan, okay? So take the booklets home if you're not quite sure, and do reread everything. If you're honest with them, and if you say, "Oh, actually, I've forgotten that part," then that's fine. Then we'll go on to another question that's maybe a little more obvious for you. Please don't worry about being arrested by an LSO, okay? They are not the police, so they don't have the power to do that. So just to make that clear, they cannot arrest you, okay? What they can do is talk to a manager if they think there's a problem, and the manager will sort things out, okay? So please don't worry, you're not going to be arrested. Okay, so that's the LSO. They are, as I say, they are only doing a job just to make sure that we're all comfortable with this legislation. Now, licensed hours. Before you read the passage, can anybody remember where licensed hours is detailed? Front door, somebody said over there, okay.
It's in the licensing plan thing you have on the wall.
Ooh.
So that is a document you have to display, and that will show.
Licensing plan on the wall, okay.
That's got who the license holder is and everything.
Okay, good. All right. Any other places? Any other documents?
Operating plan.
An operating plan. Well done. So operating plans for all premises contain the licensed hours. And yes, it turns into information that goes onto the license document, which, yes, should be displayed on the wall. However, if it's not displayed, the operating plan could be somewhere for you to read if you need to. When you're a temp worker, there will be a briefing at the start of your shift which should clearly outline for you the start and finish times for the bar that you're working on if you're working in a bar, or the restaurant if you're working in a restaurant. So they should outline all of that for you, and if they don't, then do feel free to ask. So that's where the licensed hours are written. It's in the operating plan. If it is off sales that are being carried out, then the hours are nationally restricted to no earlier than 10 a.m. and no later than 10 p.m. 7 days per week. Okay, so that's for off sales, but everywhere else, like restaurants and nightclubs, it varies from place to place. Please be aware that it is an offence to sell or allow alcohol to be served, consumed on or taken from licensed premises out with licensed hours, okay? So it does become your job to prevent people from gaining access when the time is wrong, okay? Wear a watch. Now, of course, we've just said it's an offence. However, your customers do get drinking up time allowed to them. So it's very common in bars for a bell to ring 10-15 minutes before service finishes. Ding ding, it's time for last orders, please. Your customers come up to the bar, I'd take one last pint please, or one last vodka, or whatever it is they've been drinking, and yes, you can serve them until ding ding, we're now closed. Okay, when we're closed, you stop serving, end of story. When they've just bought a drink just before closing, or 15 minutes before closing, they've actually now got 15 minutes after closing to finish those drinks. So that applies in all pubs, all nightclubs. but you get 30 minutes in restaurants. Okay, so you get half an hour if you were drinking a drink with a meal. And this is after closing, so that's called drinking up time. There's another exception which is listed in the booklet, which is for hotels. And the idea with the hotel exception is that actually hotels, in theory, can allow you to drink alcohol for 24 hours per day if you are a guest of the hotel or friends of the guests of the hotel, okay? Now, in practice, what we find now in Scotland, a lot of hotel managers don't allow that. They don't allow the bar to just be open 24 hours. They might not allow the mini bar to be open 24 hours. So it does vary. It's actually become a bit more unpopular 24-hour drinking in Scotland because it was the direction that this licensing law was heading in, was to try and get us away from 24-hour drinking, which is quite different from England, where they've gone towards more 24-hour drinking. So you will see less and less, fewer and fewer 24-hour licenses that are appropriate. Some of them you might see in casinos, for example, but less and less nowadays than in the old days. The notes here we just mentioned to you about British summertime. Feels like a long way off just while we're in January just now. But of course in British summertime our clocks go forward an hour at the beginning and back an hour at the end of that summer period. That normally happens at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on which end of summer we're in. And the old-fashioned way was that you would lose an hour of drinking or gain an extra hour of drinking, which is actually kind of not fair. So what's happened now with the new legislation is that if there's a clock behind the bar, the clock does not change whilst there are customers still here. So when the customers go home, yes, then we can revert to summertime or back to GST. Okay, so those are our licensed hours. Now, here's the duty to display notice for you at the bottom of page 4. And this is something that is very useful if a customer is arguing with you about whether or not you can serve them. What the notice is telling you is that it's an offence for a person who is under the age of 18 to buy or attempt to buy alcohol on these premises. It's then saying it's also an offence for any other person to buy alcohol on these premises for a person under the age of 18. And where there is doubt as to whether a person attempting to buy alcohol on these premises is aged 18 or over, alcohol will not be sold to the person except on the production of evidence showing the person to be 18 or above. And this is when we start to think about, we're going to say no to people if we think they're under the age of 18. But more on that in a little while. If you can go to page 5, please, we have a list of offences for you to be aware of. The miscellaneous offences listed under A are less relevant for the types of work that we're going to be offering you. However, do please be aware of the fact that an offence can be committed when making off sales to the trade, which means if you work in an off licence, you can't sell a bottle of whiskey to the restaurant owner that works next door, because it's seen to be for the trade. An offence can be committed if smuggled goods are kept or sold on licensed premises, and an offence can be committed if alcohol is sold or served on a moving vehicle, like for example trains or party buses or limousines, if there is not a suitable licence in place. Also, offences can be committed when home deliveries of alcohol are made between the hours of midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning. So home deliveries from supermarkets, if they're too late, they turn around and come back at 6 in the morning. Under B, the hours we were mentioning just a moment ago, that it is an offence to sell or allow alcohol to be served, consumed on, or taken from licensed premises out with licensed hours. At C, disorderly conduct. An offence may be committed when customers display drunk and disorderly conduct, especially including the use of obscene or indecent language to the annoyance of another person. So really what we're talking about with disorderly conduct is fighting, shouting, and particularly swearing that goes along with all of that. So your customer's actually in breach of the legislation if that's what they're doing. And staff and management can commit the offence to allow breach of the peace. So breach of the peace is one of those offences which can happen when people are shouting and fighting and so on. Now, refusal or failure to leave the premises can be an offence too. So an offence may be committed when customers fail or refuse to leave the premises, either at closing time or on being asked to leave by a responsible person. Once you've completed this training tonight, you are responsible persons. So you do have the power to ask people to leave. You also have the power to ask people to behave nicely and to stop swearing, etc. But we'll talk about that later too. There are offences which relate to drunkenness. Now, hang on a minute. Does this mean that we can't get drunk? Actually, no. What it does mean is that we can't be drunk and incapable of taking care of ourselves and attempt to enter licensed premises. That's the guy standing at the door talking to the bouncer saying, "I'm absolutely fine." Okay, so that's the guy. He can't take care of himself. We're not going to allow him access to our licensed premises to try and get some more alcohol. So that's actually the first offence that's listed. The second offence is a customer who purchases or attempts to purchase alcohol on behalf of a drunk person. The third offence that's listed is a customer that helps a drunk person to purchase or drink more alcohol. The next one that's listed is a person who sells alcohol to a drunk person, which actually could end up to be any one of you. And the one that's listed at the bottom is a staff member that's drunk on duty. So now we've used this word drunk a lot of times, and I want you to think about what drunkenness can mean, what it looks like and what we're trying to avoid. So, can anybody tell me, first of all, a word that just pops into their mind to describe drunkenness? A drunk customer, what's the first word?
Can't speak properly.
They can't speak properly, okay?
Coordination.
Oh, lots of suggestions.
Completely lose coordination.
Completely lose coordination.
Yeah, I can move properly.
They can't move properly, okay.
Incoherent, you can't understand them.
Incoherent, you can't understand them, okay.
Aggressive,
Aggressive, good word, yes, okay. More words.
sleepy, where they fall asleep at the table.
Can be sleepy, yes, yeah, okay,
Falling
good.
over.
Falling over, all right, okay. Now we do need to be slightly cautious about some of these because what you're looking to do is to combine all of them. So we were thinking about people's movement. They weren't really moving in a solid and reasonable manner. They weren't actually controlling their bodies very well. So that's when you start to see people who stagger. Okay, they can't actually stand upright, they fall over like this, they fall asleep, so they're not actually controlling that side, they're not controlling their consciousness, but the movement is one of the things that you do start to look for. The slurred speech and the aggressiveness are also things, they're signs that somebody has been drinking, but actually you also get over-familiar or over-confident behaviour. You know, people who say, "I love you, you're my best friend." Ooh, actually, a bit too much, thanks. Okay, but if they're aggressive, then those are the two extremes of emotional behaviour. So they're not controlling themselves. And actually, in the end, that's the point about drunkenness. It's defined as what we call a loss of steady self-control. So that's when you start to get the bad language and so on. Now, nobody mentioned the fact that alcohol causes people to smell of alcohol. So if they've been drinking it, they will breathe on you and they will smell like they've had a few drinks. Obviously, if they've been sick, then you might smell that vomity smell as well, which is two things that perhaps tells you this might not be a good idea for that person to have more. The quantity you've actually seen that person drink, the quantity you've actually sold to that person tells you that it's possibly not a sensible idea to give them a 10th, 11th, 12th drink. You know, a small person might not have the capacity to cope with much more, and young people tend to drink a lot and then suddenly become very, very drunk with not much transition in between. Older people will slowly get drunk, okay, because I guess they know how to cope and to pace themselves. So you do need to start making a judgment call, thinking about how much you've watched them have, thinking about how much you've actually physically sold to them, and then watching their behaviour. If they're out of control, definitely not. It's not sensible, it's not actually safe for them to have any more. So yes, you have got the power to say, "I'm sorry, I'm now going to stop serving you alcohol." You can encourage drunk people to drink soft drinks like water, orange juice, Coca-Cola, that's fine, but no more booze. So when it comes to that point, make the call.
I think it's a good idea, but I think it's very difficult to judge it on it. We work in Scotland at the night time. Most of the customers own all of the symptoms, what you said before.
Absolutely, you're absolutely
and
right.
you know, for the business is the most important upselling
I
all the
know,
time. So
I know.
very-
It's
very
a very
difficult to
difficult, yeah, it's an extremely difficult line to draw. But it's actually, the idea that we're trying to get across when we're training everybody is to sort of rein it back a little bit and to say no when it's actually appropriate to say no. And you make your own judgment calls. Everybody will make their own judgment calls, perhaps based on your experience, perhaps based on communication with other members of staff, etc. And yeah, you know, you have to sort of go in between the sort of business owner and the customer themselves, and we're trying to think about their safety more than anything else. So yes, so that's what we're thinking about with drunkenness. Try and think about it in those sorts of terms. Encourage people to drink a soft drink. If you give somebody orange juice or a Coca-Cola and they suddenly become more coherent and more able to express themselves and less aggressive, then you actually might have diagnosed somebody with diabetes that was actually needing some help from you. Now, it's one of those things that comes up around lunchtime. People have forgotten to take breakfast, they've forgotten to take lunch, and then they come into your cafe or to your bar and they need help, but they can't express it very well. It's a very common thing that diabetic people just look and sound like drunk people. If you've ever come across it yourself, you will understand what I'm talking about, but it's a really true situation, and it's very difficult. The smell of the alcohol is so similar as to be difficult to differentiate between the two. There's a couple of other medical conditions which present themselves in a similar way to somebody that's drunk. Deafness, people with slurred speech aren't necessarily drunk. And people who've fallen over aren't necessarily drunk. They might have tripped on something over the floor or been pushed by somebody or what have you. So put it all together, piece it all together like a jigsaw, and again, use your judgment when you're thinking about drunkenness. Now, the offences which relate to children and young people, we're going to kind of labour the point here for you. Adults who are over the age of 18, in other words, all adults, are allowed to purchase alcohol. They're allowed to drink alcohol and they're allowed to sell and serve alcohol. So that should be all of you. You should be over the age of 18 before you take a bar job, okay, in particular. Anybody who is not yet 18 is either classed as a child because they're under 16 or as a young person because they're between the ages of 16 and 18. Children, under no circumstances, should have access to alcohol, and that's the reason why they can't even buy the chocolates for Christmas presents and so on. Young persons, we can start thinking about the fact that they'll be 18 in a year or two's time, and we can start possibly thinking about training them. But let's just deal with the facts first, and the fact is, if they're under the age of 18, they must not be permitted to purchase alcohol, and indeed, if they ask to buy alcohol, they are breaking the law. If you remember what the duty to display notice says, then that's actually what it does mention. So if they ask for alcohol, if they order alcohol, they have broken the law at that point. So, offences are committed by a child or young person who buys or attempts to buy alcohol, or a child or young person who knowingly consumes alcohol. Offences are also committed by any person who sells alcohol to a child or young person, or who sells liqueur chocolates, liqueur confectionery, to a child. Also, any person who knowingly sends a child or young person to obtain alcohol for consumption off the premises. In other words, the old principle where you send your kids to the off-licence to buy your beer for you. That's against the law. An offence could be committed by any responsible person, in other words, any one of you, who knowingly allows alcohol to be sold to a child or young person. In other words, if you see your colleague serving an underage customer, you too can get into trouble for it happening. Any responsible person who knowingly allows a child or young person to consume alcohol, or who knowingly allows a child or young person to sell, supply, or serve alcohol, or who knowingly allows alcohol to be delivered by a child or young person in an off-licence, or who delivers alcohol or allows it to be delivered to a child or young person in the home, for example, with home deliveries. So hopefully it's quite straightforward for you. Underage people shouldn't be accessing alcohol, full stop, okay? Unfortunately, on the next page we've got some slightly confusing exceptions. The most confusing one is with restaurants. In theory, in restaurants, a young person, in other words somebody over 16, can drink alcohol with a meal. Okay, now I say in theory because it's actually not very common. However, the idea is that somebody who's under 18 but over 16, if they're eating a meal with adults, they can have a glass of wine or two, or perhaps beer, cider or perry to go with their meal. Now they themselves must not be able to order it for themselves. So if you're the waiter, if you're taking orders at the table and there's a 16-year-old saying, please can I have a glass of wine, you have to refuse them, okay, because they're under 18. If they're over 18, they can buy it for somebody who is under 18 with permission of the manager, okay? Now, if the manager does not give permission, you're not going to be selling it to them. You're not going to be serving it to that customer. So it's quite uncommon, as I say, for it to go ahead and to be allowed. But ask, you know, when you're working as a temp worker, ask the manager what their policy is about young persons drinking with meals. Most of them nowadays will just say, we don't allow it at all, but one or two might allow it, okay? So ask before you serve. So that's the most confusing one. They can't buy it for themselves. Young people, we can train them. They're going to be 18 quite soon. We'll train them as a bar back just now. They can work on the floor taking orders. They can't take orders for alcohol. They can't take cash for alcohol. And that's the part where they would have to refuse people potentially older than themselves. So that's why we don't allow them to do that part of the job. But we do allow them to stock up the bars, to stock up the fridges. We can allow them to carry drinks to tables and to clear tables and so on, but not taking the orders and not taking the cash until they become 18. And that's why it says on their 18th birthday. The third exception is test purchasing, and that is number 12 of our 16 matters. I'm going to cover that separately anyway. Now, the reason that we talk so much about underage drinking is that the penalties are quite severe. If you were caught serving an underage customer alcohol, then there's a possibility that you would be fined £5,000. Now, it tends to be less than that, but the maximum fine is £5,000. You could be imprisoned for 3 months, or possibly both of these things could happen to you. So actually we want you to be really, really strict. We want you to be really vigilant when you're serving and selling alcohol, and we do want you to say no when you believe it to be appropriate. Now, the only way that you can tell the age of your customer, there's 2 ways. The first is you look at them. It's possible to serve people without actually making eye contact. It's possible to do all sorts of things because you're going so quickly, you're serving and and actually you just didn't notice that that person was clearly under 18. So look at your customers, and that's the first step that you should take. If you think that your customer is actually under the age of 25, then it would be our policy to expect you to challenge that customer for some ID. Okay, this is called a Challenge 25 policy. Every business now has a challenge policy of one sort or another, and Quality Links is a Challenge 25 policy. So think 25 when you're serving. What you're then going to do is challenge that customer and say, can I please see your identification? Can I please see proof of your age? And they hopefully will be able to show you something. Now, what you need to do next, of course, is to look at what they've provided to you. Hopefully, what we're getting from them is a passport. I like passports. Passports are great pieces of documentation. They're quite easy to tell if they've been faked, if you know what to look for, and so on. However, don't worry about the fakery side of things. Just look at proof of people's age. So the passport is my personal favourite. An EU photo card driver's licence, so it has to have the photograph on it, is another good one. A photo card that has the PASS logo, the Proof of Age Standard Scheme logo, is also or should also be acceptable as proof of somebody's age. Now I'm going to pass this booklet around if you want to take a look in a bit more detail about at what you could be looking at. In Scotland you'll see very commonly something called a Young Scot card. So do pass the book around and just take a quick look at that. It's quite similar to a credit card. It has the person's photograph, their name, their date of birth, and there's a logo with PASS on it. And it kind of shimmers, it's a holographic logo. They're not hugely popular still in Scotland. The old version of a pass card was a piece of cardboard that you could stick a photograph to and put whatever details you wanted. So of course it was really easy to fake a pass card. It's less easy to fake now, but they are still reasonably easy to tamper with in an alright sort of way, so that it's, you know, if you're looking at it very quickly, you just might not notice. So what you're doing with any piece of proof of age is you're taking a look at the photograph first. Does it match the person standing there? Okay. If there's a beard on the photograph and there isn't a beard on the person, either it's not their ID or something's changed since the photograph was taken. If that's the case, take another look. Look at the shape of their eyes. Look at the shape of their face. Look at the colour of their hair. Sometimes it changes, of course, if people are using dyes, etc. But spend enough time that you satisfy yourself that that really is the person in front of you. If the name doesn't match their gender, then clearly it's not theirs either. These are things, these are obvious identifiers that it's clearly not their ID. Actually, the next step you should be taking is looking at the date of birth. Now, whilst we're in 2016, I want you to be aware that 1998, this year, is their 18th birthday. Okay? So 1998, whilst we're in 2016, and that would be their 18th birthday. So seeing as we're in January right now, what you'd be looking for is 1998, oh, January, oh, hang on a minute, today's date's actually the 27th of January. So if it says 27 January 1998, today is that person's birthday. Okay, so you can say happy birthday to that person, and yes, actually you should be able to serve them some alcohol, as long as the manager's happy for you to go ahead and do that. So that's really how you deal with proof of age. With all types of proof of age, if you turn it on its side and the logo does not have colours sort of shimmering from it, then actually it could be a fake. If you turn it on its side and there are scratch marks, especially if you see scratch marks beside the date of birth, somebody's been tampering with that. So you should reject these sorts of things if that's what you see. There's a few more listed in the book. A Ministry of Defence Form 90, which is the Armed Forces ID card. National identity cards from Europe. Now this is something which is still comparatively new for a few people. So I am aware that national ID cards are not 100% used for proof of age, but they should be. It has now been changed, so national ID cards, you should be accepting them. And biometric immigration documents. If you've ever come across somebody that has a visa for working in the UK, a residence card or something like that, then those cards are usable for somebody's proof of their age. So as I said, check the ID, check the photograph. Don't worry about fakes per se, but if you think it's been tampered with, then don't accept it. And if you're in any doubt whatsoever, don't accept it yourself. Ask a manager to help you, and they'll come and take a look, and they'll give you their opinion, and they'll maybe serve the customer themselves. Now, if at any point you've asked somebody to show you proof of their age and they cannot do so for any reason whatsoever, you cannot serve them alcohol. Because you've doubted what their age was in the first place, you thought they might be under 25. If they might be under 25, actually, yes, there is a chance that they could be under 18. So if they say, no, I don't carry a driver's license, or no, I don't have a passport, or whatever it is, then you cannot serve that customer alcohol, okay? So that's really quite clear, and it's actually stated in the legislation as one of the things just to pay attention to, and that's why we mark it in red on the book, okay? Okay, so that's proof of age. Page 7, test purchasing. This is the 12th of our 16 matters, and is one of the exceptions to the rules about underagers. Test purchasing happens when the police select somebody who is under 18, they select them and put them through a series of tests and give them special authorization to do the job of test purchasing. So it's a special type of job. And actually the job is breaking the law. Every time they do their job, they break the law. So that's the reason why they have to have special authorization from the police to do the job. The job is actually just to be themselves and just to come up to one of you and say, please can I have a bottle of wine or beer or whatever it is that you sell, or please can I have a glass of, vodka or something like that. And it's your job to do what we were just talking about. You're going to challenge 25, you're going to think 25, you're going to say, that person's clearly under 18, I'm going to ask you for your ID. When you do that with a test purchaser, they will give you real ID, it's not faked, there's no tampering, there's no changes to it whatsoever, and your job is to look at the ID and say, well, it is your ID, but it clearly shows that your date of birth makes you under the age of 18. So I'm not going to serve you alcohol. If you do that, you've passed the test, okay? And the test is being observed by a police officer, okay? So if you were to fail the test at test purchasing, yep, you could be arrested and fined on the spot. Now, on-the-spot fines, from what I understand, will be around about £250, but of course you get a criminal record for it. So avoid being caught by test purchasing. You can't really be caught, but yeah, you will. You end up with a criminal record for it, yeah. And there's a possibility that if you fail a test purchase, that the whole business might end up being closed down. Yeah. So it's important anyway. The reason that test purchasing is carried out is actually just to test that you're paying attention at this point of the training, okay? It's to test you to see that you're paying attention whilst you're serving people as well. And the paying attention part is looking at your customers, challenge 25, and you really can't go wrong, okay? So use challenge 25 to your advantage. Now, this is very, very clear at the very bottom of the test purchasing section. It says that if they are underage and working without police authorization, then an offence is being committed, okay? So if a manager organises a 16-year-old to do the job, then the manager doesn't have the right authorization for them to go ahead and do that. So it has to be the police that conducts test purchasing, because it's observed and it's actually to protect you and to protect the young person at the same time. Right, so that's the end of section B. If you want to go back to your questionnaires, do have a little break, have some toilet time, some water time, some cigarette time if you need some. Say around about 5 minutes or so, folks, okay? Page 8 is the beginning of section C, and section C is all about health and safety. So health and safety is the part where we now start to think that alcohol creates dangerous situations, it creates health situations. So we are looking for you guys to sort of slightly, not so much control your customers, but offer them maybe better advice or better choices. Now, we start by kind of mentioning binge drinking. Binge drinking is something that British people do, okay? We go out on a Friday night, Saturday night, it's fun, we get as smashed as we possibly can, it's even more fun, we make bad choices and have the best fun ever, okay? And that's actually what binge drinking can lead to for some people. Generally, excess drinking is bad for us. It can seriously affect your long-term health. Heavy drinkers, people who drink a lot on a regular basis, face a variety of different diseases, one of which is actually alcoholism, which is quite a different thing from just being a binge drinker. So there's a list of diseases which are included in the booklet here: heart problems, cancer, mental health problems. And mental health problems actually stem from the fact that, as somebody mentioned earlier, alcohol is a depressant. So mental health problems are very common for people who drink heavily. Sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancy. These things stem from those bad decisions that people make. So this is why binge drinking can create these sorts of problems. So binge drinking is drinking to get drunk. It is seen as a major health and safety issue in Scotland. It's part of the drinking culture, of course, so there's not a huge amount we can do about it other than to try and change the culture slowly and little by little, which is actually partly what this legislation is kind of aiming towards. Unfortunately, there is no agreed measure for binge drinking. So there isn't, I can't say to you, you've had 5 drinks, you're binge drinking, stop doing it, because you're different from me. and I'm different from you, and everybody has a different tolerance level, etc. I have to be honest, now I can take about 2 units of alcohol before I start to feel quite drunk. So my body's changed since I was a student. I used to be able to drink 5 or 6 pints, walk home, talk to people, make reasonable decisions, no problem. But things change, you know, life moves on. Now, the Office for National Statistics has taken an average. They've canvassed everybody who's out binge drinking, how many of you had, and they've come up with figures which are 6 units for women and 6 units for men as an average of what people drink on a binge session. It's not actually what we would necessarily class as a safe measure. It's not a safe limit or a stop limit because everybody's so different. What has happened is that the British Medical Association has provided us with guidelines for sensible alcohol consumption. They're called sensible drinking limits, and they are listed in the booklet here. But for a man, the BMA recommends that a maximum of 21 units per week is sensible. This is around about 3 to 4 units per day. For a woman, the maximum is 14 units per week or 2 to 3 units per day. Now, the advice is that if your customer or if yourself, if you're drinking regularly, if you're drinking every single day, then you spread out your units. You have a few glasses each day rather than all in one go. Also have 2 days off each week. If you're going to drink a few units every day, have a couple of days every week where you don't drink at all. Give your body a chance to recover. So those are the bits of advice, and sometimes actually what you do find is that people they save up what they think of as an allowance so that they can have a proper drinking session. So ladies might drink 14 units because I've had a completely dry week all week, or they might do that the following week after 2 weeks of not drinking. They might do it if they've had 3 weeks of not drinking, which means that they've tripled the allowance, and that is dangerous. In fact, doubling the allowance is a dangerous thing to do. It can be dangerous depending on, again, what your tolerance levels are like and so on. So spread them out, drink regularly, and drink slowly and sensibly. Now, we've just mentioned this word units. So there's a definition of the word unit. We think of alcohol in strengths, and we say that somebody's had X number of units to drink today, or there are this many units in a glass of beer or whatever it is that they're drinking. So there are ways to define a unit. If you take pure ethanol, as you rightly said, we are talking about pure ethanol here when we say that 10 millilitres is 1 unit. 10 millilitres actually weighs 8 grams. So those two definitions are actually chemistry definitions, they're science definitions, and they're not really particularly relevant in the real world, but they are still used as definitions. The relevant definition, which you'll come across a lot, is a 40% spirit. Something like gin, vodka, whiskey and rum. Those tend to be 40%, and if it is exactly 40%, then 25 mils is 1 unit of alcohol. So 3 definitions that you can use. But of course, we don't tend to sell just exclusively vodka, whiskey, gin and rum. We'll sell things like beers and wines and vermouths and all sorts of different things that have different percentages on them. They're served in different volumes, and so then the question becomes, well, hang on a minute, how many units am I drinking? I'm the customer, I want to know how many units you've just served me, because who knows, I'm pregnant, okay, or I'm driving, or something like that, okay? Customers do ask these sorts of questions sometimes, and some of them are very keen to stick within their sensible drinking limits from the BMA. So, to answer their question, you need to have good product knowledge. And actually, if you use maths on your products, then you can give them a very, very exact and precise answer. So the maths is that you take the volume of the drink that you served them, you multiply that by the strength of the drink for the alcohol by volume percentage, and you divide by 1,000. And there is, listed on the book, the mathematical equation that you would use. So millilitres times percentage divided by 1,000 equals the number of units that you're selling and serving. So if you look at the examples underneath, The first example is a 250ml glass of wine, and it's 12%, and that actually it constitutes 3 units of alcohol. That's enough for me. I would stop there. I can't take any more personally. The next example is a can of lager. If it's 450 millilitres, if it is 4.5%, then 2 units is very, very reasonable for a can of lager. Glass of whiskey, 25 mils, 40%, 1 unit. Bottle of cider, 250 mils, 8%, that would be 2 units. 250 mils is a slightly unusual measure really for a bottle. However, if that's the case, then that's the number of units. A 175ml glass of wine is much more common in terms of the sizes that we serve. 13% is totally reasonable for wine, so you have 2.3 units in that glass. So that means that another glass will bring somebody up to 4.6 units. So they might decide they want to stop. Okay, it depends on what they want to do. An Alcopop is listed here. If it was 250 millilitres, if it was 6%, then an Alcopop might well be 1.5 units. And it's not unreasonable for Alcopops to contain about that. Now, when we talk about Alcopops, of course, we mean WKD, we mean Smirnoff Ice, and those types of things. They're pre-mixed alcoholic drinks. So so your alcoholic products come in a wide variety of volumes and strengths, and good product knowledge enhances your customer experience and gives them the information that they might want. So try and get used to things, do the maths on things if you think it's a good idea. Now the next section, or the next page, on page 9, we're just briefly going to touch on drugs and licensed premises. Alcohol, as we've mentioned a couple of times tonight, alcohol is a legal drug. So it's legally permitted by the government that we can purchase it, we can drink it and so on. But we know, of course, you've probably come across them or heard about them, that there are controlled substances that are classed as illegal substances. Now, people use illegal substances in all kinds of ways. One of the ways, unfortunately, is to commit a crime called drink spiking. And drink spiking is where a glass is left behind. You maybe walk away from your glass to go to the toilet or to talk to a friend, and somebody behind you, without your knowledge, will add something to your glass. And they could add any sort of substance, actually. We've had lots of different examples given to me over the years I've been doing this training. But ecstasy, cocaine, heroin, LSD, somebody told me an experience they had, which they quite enjoyed. Lucky them. Okay. Not for me, thank you very much, especially if I don't know it's happening. Okay. Now, somebody once told me that brake fluid was found to have been added to their glass. Now, I don't even know what effect that can have on somebody. However, people watch you. If you're spiked, people are going to be watching you to see if they can commit the crimes that they might be thinking about, like sexual assaults, like robberies. It's not uncommon, unfortunately. Now, as members of the bar team, as members of the waiting team, we can protect our customers by clearing away unattended glasses. So if you see that people have all gone to the dance floor or all gone to the toilet, you clear away the glasses, because you don't know how quickly it can happen. And it can literally happen as you turn your back on the glass. And somebody's so quick and they just walk away and it's done. So as members of the team, clear away the glasses. If the manager allows you to replace for free, then go ahead and do that. But you talk to your managers about what their policies are on that sort of thing. But clear them away, protect them from spiking. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that customers can approach you and say, I think my drink's been spiked. Okay? Now, they might look to you like they've just had an awful lot to drink, but actually they're feeling very unwell, they're feeling not themselves, very much like something else is happening. They might be feeling nauseous, like they're going to suddenly go unconscious, like they're going to fall over, or anything at all. I think my drink has been spiked, you take it seriously. Give them a quiet place to sit down, give them a glass of fresh cold water, speak to your manager and get the emergency services for them, because they could well need sudden emergency medical attention. So do those sorts of things. Be as quick and as reasonable as you possibly can. If your customer brings the glass to you and says, I think this has been spiked, take it carefully from them, Okay, store it for the police so that the police can take samples, and don't leave any more fingerprints on it. Okay, if there are fingerprints, they might well be looking at fingerprints. Okay, and certainly they are going to be looking for a sample of whatever's in there. So don't wash the glass. All right, take it and store it safely. But certainly that's what to look for with drink spiking, and as I say, if we're vigilant about it, then we can protect our customers. Drug dealing is the other thing to be vigilant about. Managers that run licensed premises are keen to stay within the legislation, to stay within the law. So if they are seen to be aiding and abetting drug dealers, then all kinds of problems can happen for them. So your role in all of this is actually just to watch customers and to identify if you think they are behaving suspiciously. Okay? Suspicious behaviour takes all sorts of forms. Actually, drug dealers look like normal people. Drug dealers sometimes look like normal people, but drug dealers kind of behave slightly differently. Okay? So if you think you're looking at somebody that might be selling something illegal, tell your manager about it, and they will take action. It's actually not for you to take the action, it's for your manager to deal with it. They need to observe, they need to decide whether or not they're calling the police, they need to figure out whether or not they're going to use their door personnel, etc. So just tell somebody if you think that's what you're looking at. Now, people who use drugs, who take drugs recreationally, are actually not breaking the law. They might be breaking the law if they are selling the drugs, okay? If they are in possession of, let's say, ecstasy tablets and they've got a certain number above an allowance, etc., then they might be seen to be in possession with intent to supply. However, just because they've taken something does not mean to say that we're going to necessarily take any action. We're going to observe them, we're going to watch and see if we think they're selling drugs. We might decide that it's not a totally sensible idea for them to drink alcohol to combine with the drugs, but on the other hand, legally, we can't refuse to sell alcohol to people on drugs just purely on the basis that that's what they're doing. So legally, yeah, you can carry on and sell them alcohol, but sensibly, are they conscious? If they're not conscious, if they've taken something and they're unconscious, then no, you're not going to be serving them alcohol. If they've been very unwell, if they've vomited and things like that, then alcohol's really not a good idea. So again, you can encourage people to drink soft drinks under these circumstances, but not necessarily to refuse service just because they've taken a tablet or something like that, okay? But drug use is a possible indicator that drugs are being sold on the premises. So always report it if you think you're seeing it. Now, unfortunately, people on drugs have got all sorts of different indicators to tell you that they're on something. It's a changed behaviour, so it could be lots of moving around or not very much moving around. It could be lots of talking or not very much talking. They could have very wide pupils or very tiny pupils. They could be bright red or very pale. So there's a lot of variety in the way people react to drugs. So you just might not recognise it, you might not spot it yourselves, you just might not have the experience to tell. But if you think that that's what you're looking at, talk to somebody that might know a bit more about it. Now then, customer service. You guys are going to give great customer service because you are going to make eye contact with your customers and you're going to smile at them and you're going to say, hello there, what can we do for you? Okay? Actually, that's what customer service starts with. And that's what we do wherever we work, in bars, in restaurants, in shops, and so on. So we talk to our customers, we're friendly about it as much as we're able to be. We're efficient when we can be, and we give them what they want as quickly as possible, and we give them the right change. We also say thank you. That's what customer service is in the end. So that's really what we're looking for you to do. At all times, at number 8 on the list is be calm, polite and professional. Now, your excellent service, of course, involves having good product knowledge, menu knowledge, upselling, as you were talking about earlier, and you can offer extra touches to the service that you provide, such as, did you enjoy the rugby match? That's not an unfair question to ask people. Unfortunately, if you turn the page to page 10, refusing service is something that you have to do legally, and this is following on from all the offences that can be committed. So you will have to say, I'm sorry, but I'm not serving you, you are under 18. I'm sorry, but I'm not serving you. I think you've had too much to drink already. I'm sorry, I can't serve you, the bar's closed. Okay? And also, I'm sorry, I can't serve you because I think that you're supplying alcohol for a drunk person or an underage customer. Those are actually 4 times when you're going to be saying sorry but no many, many times. The word sorry makes it a little bit easier to swallow. So if you do have to refuse service, use it. Okay? Be polite about it and calm and respectful. If necessary, you can repeat yourself. You can confirm to the customer that if by serving them you would be breaking the law, then you're not going to go ahead and do so. So you can keep confirming that. You can be consistent in what you say to people and stay calm. Maintaining eye contact gives them the message directly into their minds, as it were. If you break eye contact from somebody, in other words, if you turn away, or if in fact you were to say to somebody, I'm sorry, I'm not serving, and then walk away like this, I've turned my back on all of you. I can't see what your reaction is, first of all. Second of all, I can pretty much guarantee that your reaction is going to be, oh, God, she barely spoke to me, she barely said anything to me, she didn't explain why she's saying no, and now I'm going to hurt her, okay? So actually, turning your back on somebody is just dangerous, as well as being somewhat rude. So maintain eye contact, get the message in, and please can you pay attention, because I'm telling you something really important, which is, no, I'm not going to serve you alcohol. And that's why the eye contact is so, so valuable. So when to refuse service is reiterated back in the booklet. You're underage, you're drunks, your closing time, and what we call the proxy buyer. Now, good practice if you have a refusal, if you do have that sort of situation come up when you're serving people, good practice, best practice, is talk to the manager first. Tell them that it's happened. Tell them who it was you refused and why. Any sensible manager will say, thank you very much, I'm keeping records, and they will go and write it down in something called a refusals log. So these are useful books or documents that a lot of managers now use. Now, they are not required by law, so some managers don't use them, okay? Some managers just rely on the fact that actually we refuse service to underage people all the time, and I'm confident in my staff and I'm very happy with them. In fact, I'm the only person serving anyway, so I always say no if I think they're underage, etc. So some managers don't use them because the requirement is not there. It is going to be the manager who passes it along for other people to inspect, like LSOs, for example. So it's not actually going to be your responsibility to pass the refusals log to anybody else. All your responsibility is to write down the details, and then the manager will transfer the details to the rest of the team. If there were 30 of you working behind the bar and one person has a refusal, actually what we need to do is make sure that that customer doesn't get served by the person at the other end of the bar. And that's partly what these logs can be used for, and it's a discreet way of communicating. Shouting about refusals can be embarrassing for customers. Telling everybody, that guy over there with the red hair and the tartan kilt, no, he's not being served because he's too drunk, or whatever, whatever the problem might be. So shouting about it is bad practice. But certainly that's how to deal with refusals. Remember to use good practice and use your manager and the refusals log when it comes up. Now, at the bottom of page 10 is matter number 16, managing conflict. So we are close to the end, okay? Managing conflict is something that you can do. You can manage the behaviour of your customers actually by making sure that they're having a good time. If they're happy, you really don't need to do very much. If they're smiling and laughing and dancing and having a lovely time, great, okay? Everything's working out just as it should. If you can see frowning faces, if you can hear bad language, if you can hear things like that, it starts to become an indicator that there might not be everything all right. If you can see people being pushed around, if there's a chance that somebody has been hit, then there's a possible fight just about to occur, okay? So you can, in theory, you can step into the breach and you can say, folks, is everything okay? Do we have to ask you to leave? Is there going to be a fight? Okay, now that hopefully will spur customers to control themselves, to control their language, to decide to leave if they think that's appropriate and go fight outside, or any of these sorts of things. So you can control it in that way. What I would suggest is that you are not really expected to try and solve any of their problems. You know, he said and she said, you can't help them with any of that. They shouldn't be talking about it whilst you're working and disturbing the rest of the guests and rest of the customers. So, you know, you can say to them, actually, you know, we've got families in, we want you to stop swearing. Do we have to ask you to leave because we're really not going to allow you to have a fight here, etc., okay? And sometimes people do sort of calm themselves down. What we do say to you is never step towards a fight. Don't get involved. If people are fighting, absolutely not. What you do is you go behind your bar, you lock yourself into the cupboard, you phone the police from the cupboard using your mobile phone if you think it's necessary. So stay safe, and actually in the end that's what it's all about, is making yourself safe. If you can help your colleagues to stay safe, fantastic. If you can help some of your customers to stay safe, even better. But actually the priority is your own safety. Okay, so call the police if you think there is not suitable control of whatever situation is happening. Try to avoid being bullied into breaking the law, and as I mentioned, put your safety first. If you stay calm when you're talking to people, if you're assertive but not rude, then they're much more likely to listen to you. If you walk up to people and go, right, let's start a fight, then you're starting a fight, okay? If you walk up to people and say, oh, please, please don't fight, then you're more likely to get hurt, okay? So actually you need to control your own body language as well as your verbal language. Now, the last little bit on the next page is about shoplifting, and it's just mentioning to you that shoplifting can lead to assaults because we're inclined to sort of tap people on the shoulder and say, excuse me, can I help you? When actually we can prevent people from trying to shoplift just by making eye contact and saying, hello there. So making the eye contact, can I help you? It will prevent an awful lot more than CCTV and electronic tagging might. So that's where there's a statistical link really between shoplifting and assaults. That's the end, guys. That's all of my talky bit. What I would like you to do now is to finish your questionnaires. Come up to the table, I'll get you to sign your training record. I don't think we have time, unfortunately, to mark them tonight, but what I will do is mark them and let you know if you passed or failed. Actually, if you don't hear from me, then you've passed, okay? If you do hear from me, I'll be in contact with you and I'll run through a couple of questions with you. But do come up once you've completed it and we'll get your signatures, okay? Thank you all very much.